When people talk about the happiest moment of their lives, they almost always say it's the day their child was born. I wish I could say the same. I wish my memory of holding my daughter for the first time was pure and untouchable. But it isn't. Instead, when I think about that day, my hands shake, my heart turns to ice, and I remember the cold smell of antiseptic and the look in the nurse's eyes. A look I didn't understand until it was almost too late. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's a reckoning. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. It started so quietly. My labor was long, exhausting, but nothing out of the ordinary. At least, that's what the doctors told me. I barely noticed the time slipping by, the world shrinking until it was just me and the slow, insistent pain, and my husband Mark, sitting beside me, his hand clamped tight around mine. When our daughter finally arrived, I heard her first cry before I even saw her. The sound made me sob with relief. They put her on my chest, this tiny, perfect stranger, and I remember thinking, she's real. She's mine. But within minutes, there was a shift in the room. The nurse, a woman I'd barely noticed, leaned over, her name tag glinting, and told me she needed to take my baby for some routine tests. She was calm, almost casual, but something about the way she avoided my eyes made my scalp prickle. I tried to protest, but exhaustion drowned out my words. The nurse promised she'd be right back. I forced myself to relax. Hospitals have their procedures, I told myself. Mark kissed my forehead and told me to sleep. I didn't want to. I wanted to watch the door and wait for my daughter to come back. But I closed my eyes for just a minute. When I woke up, an hour had passed. Mark was gone, off to get coffee maybe, or call his mother. The sun had shifted, leaving the room in pale gray light. My chest felt hollow. I rang for the nurse. No one answered. Minutes crawled by. I pressed the call button again, harder this time, panic blooming in my throat. Still nothing. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the ache between my hips, and shuffled to the window for air. That's when I saw it. Down below, just past the ambulance bay, a nurse in blue scrubs hurrying toward the staff parking lot. She was carrying a bundle, something small, wrapped in the same pink and blue blanket they'd swaddled my baby in. My vision tunneled. I slammed my palm against the glass. She didn't look up. She just kept walking, faster now, glancing over her shoulder. That's when everything snapped inside me. I stumbled out of the room, barefoot, the world tilting. No one stopped me. No one even seemed to notice as I pushed through the hallway, my hospital gown flapping, adrenaline drowning out the pain. I took the stairs 2 at a time, not caring who saw me. I burst through the side door just in time to see the nurse unlock a car, an old silver sedan I didn't recognize, and slide inside, my baby still cradled in her arms. I screamed her name. She froze, hands shaking, then sped off, tires squealing. My body went numb. I ran after her, but it was useless. I collapsed in the parking lot, my knees scraping on the asphalt, my mind refusing to process what I'd just seen. You're watching Women Unwritten. Tap like and subscribe so more voices get heard. The next hour passed in a blur. Alarms blared, hospital staff swarmed around me. Someone wrapped a blanket over my shoulders and tried to pull me inside. But I wouldn't move. Not until the police arrived, not until I could force the words out. My baby? She took my baby. I described the nurse, her dark hair pulled back, the way her hands trembled. No one recognized her from my description. They said all their nurses were accounted for. Mark arrived, wild-eyed, clutching a paper cup of coffee he dropped when he saw my face. I tried to tell him what happened, but the words stuck in my throat. He grabbed my shoulders, begging me to make sense. "What do you mean, they took her?" he shouted. "Who took her, Emily?" I shook my head, unable to answer. The police led us back inside, asked us questions I couldn't answer. What was her name? Did you see a badge? Did you know her? The more I thought about it, the less sure I became. Had I imagined her? Was I delirious from pain and lack of sleep? But the memory of that blue bundle, those nervous glances, was real. I could still see her face, ghostly and determined. Hours passed. The hospital went into lockdown. Mark paced the room, fists clenched, blaming himself for leaving me alone. My mother arrived, pale and trembling. She hugged me, but her arms felt cold. The police searched the hospital, questioned everyone, checked the security cameras. When they came back, their faces were grave. They showed me a grainy video. There, clear as day, was the nurse carrying my daughter through the emergency exit. But the camera lost her before she reached the lot. The license plate was unreadable. The detective, an older woman with kind eyes, sat beside me and spoke in a low voice. "We're doing everything we can. We'll find her." I wanted to believe her, but the world felt suddenly hollow, as if all the air had been sucked out. Mark sat beside me, silent, his hand gripping mine so tightly my fingers went numb. I spent the night in the hospital, my body aching, milk leaking from my chest with no child to feed. The nurses tried to comfort me, but their words were empty. Every time a door opened, my heart leapt, hoping it would be someone bringing my daughter back. But it never was. The next morning, the detective returned. They'd found the car abandoned 5 miles away, wiped clean, nothing inside but the pink and blue blanket. I broke down. Mark pulled me into his arms, but I could feel his fear, sharp and frantic, radiating off him. Days blurred into each other. The police questioned everyone: family, friends, hospital staff. They asked if we had enemies, if anyone might want to hurt us. I shook my head. We were ordinary people. We lived in a safe neighborhood, kept to ourselves, paid our bills on time. Who would do this to us? A week passed, our house filled with flowers and casseroles from neighbors, their pity clinging to the air like mildew. I avoided the nursery, the untouched crib, the little clothes folded neatly in drawers. Mark grew distant, disappearing into the garage for hours. My mother moved in, hovering over me, trying to keep me from falling apart. But I was already broken. I spent hours online, reading stories about missing children, desperate parents, unsolved cases. I clung to every hope, every rumor. I refused to sleep, afraid I'd miss a call. I left the porch light on every night. Then, one evening, as I stared out the window, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered, breathless. A woman's voice, muffled and trembling. "If you want your daughter back, come to the old train station. Alone. Midnight." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I wanted to call the police, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe, or hope. I told Mark I needed air and left before he could stop me. I drove through empty streets, heart pounding so loud I thought it might shatter the windows. The train station was abandoned, shadows stretching across cracked pavement. I waited, nerves fraying with every passing minute. At exactly midnight, a car pulled up. The same silver sedan. The nurse stepped out, holding my daughter, alive, wrapped in the same blanket. I rushed toward her, sobbing, arms outstretched. She hesitated, eyes darting, then pressed the baby into my arms. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Forgive me." And then she was gone, running back to the car, disappearing into the night before I could even thank her or ask why. I cradled my daughter, breathing in her scent, dizzy with relief and confusion. The police arrived moments later, lights flashing, sirens shattering the silence. I collapsed to my knees, clutching my baby as they swarmed around us. At the hospital, doctors checked her over, pronouncing her healthy. Mark arrived, sobbing, falling to his knees beside me. I thought the nightmare was over. I thought we could go home, lock the doors, and pretend none of it had happened. But I was wrong. I'd barely begun to understand what we'd lost, and what was still waiting for us in the shadows, just out of sight. Women Unwritten. The nurse took my baby for tests. But I saw her in the parking lot. I followed, and the truth shattered my family. Part 2. Docs. The world didn't snap back to normal just because my daughter was safe in my arms again. If anything, the return of her tiny warmth only exposed how deep the cracks had gone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that nurse's face, the pleading, the regret, the panic as she thrust my child back to me. The detectives called it a miracle. My mother wanted to call it a nightmare we could finally forget. But I knew better. Something was wrong. Something hadn't been answered. We were home, the nursery filled with sunlight and the soft music of lullabies, but it felt like a stage set. Mark hovered, watching both me and our daughter as if afraid either of us would disappear if he blinked. He barely spoke, and when he did, it was always about practical things. Bottles, diapers, bills. He avoided my eyes when I asked if he was all right. I tried to settle into motherhood, but every sound made me jump. Every car door outside sent panic running through my veins. Our neighbors were kind, but they stared too long. Their sympathy mingled with curiosity. People kept asking what had happened, what the police were doing, if the woman had been caught. I had no answers for them. The police seemed to have none either. They'd taken my statement, dusted the nursery for fingerprints, and then faded into the background, promising to keep us updated. Weeks went by, and no one was arrested. The nurse had vanished without a trace. One morning, as I rocked my daughter in the nursery, Mark appeared in the doorway holding an envelope. He looked so pale, I thought he might faint. "This came for you," he said, voice flat. It was a plain white envelope, no return address. My name printed on the front in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The message was short, almost desperate. "I'm sorry. You need to ask Mark about 2003. Trust your instincts." My blood ran cold. I looked up at him, searching for answers in his face, but he just shook his head. "What is it?" he asked. But I could see the flicker of fear in his eyes, the way he retreated behind that polite mask. After he left the room, I reread the note again and again. What did 2003 mean? I'd met Mark in 2011. Before me, he never talked much about his past, just vague stories about college and a job he hated. I realized I knew almost nothing about his life before we met. I tried to brush it off as a cruel prank, maybe some sick joke from someone who'd seen us on the news. But the unease wouldn't let go. The next day, I called the detective. She listened quietly as I read her the note. "We'll look into it," she said, but her voice was weary. I got the sense she thought I was grasping at shadows. Maybe I was. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something right in front of me. Something I wasn't seeing. Late that night, after Mark had fallen asleep, I crept downstairs and searched through the old file box he kept in his office. I felt like a criminal, heart hammering in my chest. Most of it was boring. Tax returns, insurance forms, faded receipts. But at the very bottom, I found a stack of old photographs held together with a rubber band. There was Mark, younger, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. She was pretty, with dark hair and sad eyes. In some of the pictures, she looked pregnant. On the back, in slanted handwriting, were dates, spring and summer of 2003. Underneath the photos was a crumpled letter, the ink faded. I squinted to make out the words. "Mark, you promised you'd help. I can't do this alone. Please, if you care about us at all, come back. L." I sank onto the floor, the photographs trembling in my hands. Who was this woman? What was Mark hiding? My mind spun with possibilities, none of them good. I wanted to confront him, demand the truth, but part of me was afraid of what I might hear. The next morning, I waited until he was feeding our daughter before I brought it up. I set the photos and letter on the kitchen table. He stared at them for a long time, his face unreadable. Finally, he sighed, the fight draining out of him. Her name was Laura, he said quietly. We were together a long time ago. She got pregnant. I wasn't ready. I left. She wanted me to come back, but I didn't. I was a coward. His words landed like stones. Did she have the baby? He nodded. A boy. I never met him. I tried to put it behind me. I didn't think. His voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. He looked at me, eyes rimmed with red. I was ashamed. I thought if I never talked about it, it would go away. I didn't think it could ever touch us now. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was grief. Grief for the woman in the pictures, for the child who'd never met his father, for the secrets that were unraveling everything I thought I knew. That afternoon, the detective called. We found something, she said. A woman matching the nurse's description checked into a motel on the edge of town the night your daughter was taken. She used the name Laura Bennett. My breath caught. Laura. The name from the letter. The woman in the photographs. I sat in the living room, my daughter asleep in my arms, trying to process what this meant. Was Laura the nurse? Had she really taken my baby? And if so, why? I confronted Mark again, the questions pouring out of me. He was shaking, tears in his eyes. I haven't seen her in years. He swore. I swear, Emily, I had nothing to do with this. But doubt gnawed at me. How could I believe him, after all the lies? I wondered if this was what our life would be from now on. A constant unease, a suspicion that would never quite fade. I watched the news obsessively, hoping for updates. But the story faded, replaced by newer tragedies, fresher faces. People stopped calling, stopped bringing casseroles. The world moved on. One night, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, the phone rang again. Unknown number. I froze, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I answered, barely able to breathe. Emily, a woman's voice said. I need to see you, please. It's about your daughter, and Mark. Before I could reply, she gave me an address and hung up. The house was on the edge of town, an old rental with peeling paint and overgrown grass. I parked down the block, nerves jangling. I left Mark at home, telling him I needed some air. He didn't protest. He seemed relieved to have a break from the tension. I knocked on the door. It swung open, and there she was, the nurse from the hospital. Laura. Older now, hair streaked with gray, but unmistakable. Her eyes were red, her face drawn. She let me in, her movements stiff with exhaustion. The house was sparse, cluttered with old toys and faded photographs. On the mantel, I saw a picture of a teenage boy with Mark's eyes. She poured me tea, her hands shaking so badly she spilled some on the table. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I stared at her, anger and fear warring inside me. Why did you take my daughter? She swallowed hard. I thought if I did, someone would listen. Someone would finally hear me. She told me her story. How she'd loved Mark. How he'd left her when she needed him most. How she'd tried to raise their son alone, scraping by on a nurse's salary. How their boy, Ethan, had gotten sick. So sick she thought she'd lose him. She reached out to Mark, but he never answered. She begged for help, but he never came. Her eyes filled with tears. He needed a bone marrow transplant. Mark was a match, but I couldn't find him in time. He survived, but barely. And now he wants to know his father. He wants answers. He saw you on the news. He saw your perfect life, your new baby. He got angry. He blamed you. I felt like I was drowning. So you took my daughter? To punish me? To punish Mark? She shook her head, desperate. No, I just wanted someone to listen. I wanted Mark to finally face what he'd done. I wanted to scream, to throw the tea in her face, to run. But all I could do was stare at the photo of Ethan, a boy robbed of a father, a mother driven to desperation. I gave her back, Laura said softly. I couldn't go through with it. I saw your face, and I remembered what it was like to hold my own baby for the first time. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I stood, heart pounding. You need to turn yourself in. She nodded, defeated. I will. I needed you to know. I needed you to understand. I left the house in a daze, the world spinning. I called the detective as soon as I got into the car, told her everything. I drove home on autopilot, my mind a storm of grief and fury and pity. Mark was waiting for me in the living room, eyes hollow. I told him what Laura had said. He crumpled, sobbing, hands pressed to his face. For the first time, I saw the boy he'd been, the boy who'd run from his mistakes and never stopped running. I held our daughter close that night, watching her sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling. I thought about Laura, about Ethan, about all the broken families drifting through the world, held together by secrets and lies. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew nothing would ever be the same. Women Unwritten. The nurse took my baby for tests, but I saw her in the parking lot. I followed, and the truth shattered my family. Part 3. Doc's sleep became impossible after that. Every time I closed my eyes, my thoughts spun between images of Laura's trembling hands, the haunted look on Mark's face, and my own daughter's peaceful breathing. I kept thinking there had to be some way to stitch everything back together, to make it all right, but the seams had torn too far. The police arrested Laura 2 days later. The detective called me personally, her voice gentle but heavy. Laura hadn't resisted. She'd confessed everything, her desperation, the plan to scare Mark into facing her and their son, her inability to go through with it once she saw me collapse in the parking lot. The detective said, "She's remorseful. The DA will take her state of mind into account." I wanted to feel relieved, but all I felt was tired. I spent hours staring at the nursery ceiling, listening to my daughter's soft snuffles. Mark and I hardly spoke. He shuffled through the house, ghost-like, lost in memories I couldn't touch. I tried to ask him about Ethan, about Laura, about what he wanted to do, but he always said, "I don't know," or just shook his head, his eyes far away. Sometimes I heard him crying in the shower, and it broke something in me every time. It was my mother, of all people, who forced the next step. She sat me down at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly around a mug of tea. "You have to talk to him, Emily. He can't hide from this forever." I wanted to snap at her, to tell her she didn't understand, but I knew she was right. The silence was poisoning us. So one evening, after the baby was asleep and the house had settled into its hush, I found Mark in the backyard, sitting on the cold steps. I sat beside him, feeling the chill seep through my thin sweater. "She turned herself in," I said quietly. He nodded, wiping his nose. "I know." There was a long pause, the air thick with everything unspoken. "Do you want to see him?" I asked finally. "Ethan?" Mark's shoulders hunched. "I don't know if he'd want to see me." "He's your son," I said, and the words felt strange in my mouth, foreign and sharp. He covered his face with his hands. "I was so young, Emily. I was stupid. I didn't know how to be there for anyone, not even myself." I put my hand on his back, felt him shudder. "You can't undo what happened, but you can try to do better now." He nodded slowly, a tear sliding down his cheek. "If he wants to see me, I'll go." The next day, the detective called again. Laura wanted to see Mark before she was transferred. At first, Mark refused, fear and shame tightening his voice. But something shifted overnight. He came into the nursery at dawn, looking hollow but determined. "I'll go," he said. "Will you come with me?" The jail was nothing like on TV. No shouting, no clang of metal bars, just tired faces and fluorescent lights. Laura sat behind a glass partition, hands folded in her lap. When she saw Mark, her eyes filled with tears. She looked smaller, older, her confidence drained away. Mark lifted the phone, his hands shaking. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. Laura nodded, tears spilling over. "I know. I wanted you to know your son. He deserves to know where he came from. I'm sorry for everything." Their conversation was awkward, halting, but real. I sat beside Mark, silent, watching the two of them dance around years of pain and regret. Laura never looked at me directly, but when she stood to leave, she turned and spoke softly through the glass. "Take care of her, and if Ethan wants to meet you, don't run this time." I nodded, unable to speak. Afterwards, Mark was quiet on the drive home, but something in his posture had changed. A weight had shifted, even if only a little. He spent that night holding our daughter, stroking her hair, whispering words I couldn't quite hear. A week passed. Life tried to settle back into a pattern. Mark reached out to a counselor, and I encouraged him gently, not wanting to push too hard. He wrote a letter to Ethan, long, heartfelt, apologizing for everything, inviting him to meet if and when he was ready. He showed it to me before mailing it, his hands trembling. "It's not enough," he said, "but it's something." The days blurred together, but sometimes I caught Mark staring out the window, hope and fear warring in his eyes. He was waiting for a response, though he tried to hide it. Then, one afternoon, an envelope arrived, the handwriting boyish and uncertain. Inside was a short note. "I want to meet. My mom said you're ready now. Saturday at the park, if you want." I watched Mark read it, saw the way his eyes lit up, and then immediately filled with tears. He looked at me, helpless. "What if he hates me?" "He's reaching out," I said softly. "That's something. That's hope." Saturday came. I dressed our daughter carefully, even though she wouldn't remember the day. Mark was quiet, pale, his hands never still. We drove to the park in silence. My heart ached for him, for all of us really. Ethan was waiting on a bench beneath an old oak tree, a thin teenager with a mop of dark hair and Mark's unmistakable eyes. He stood as we approached, his face guarded. I hung back, letting Mark lead. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with long silences and stilted questions. Ethan didn't smile, but he didn't leave. He listened as Mark told him about his childhood, his regrets, the mistakes he'd made. I watched Ethan's face soften, just a little, as Mark's voice broke. Finally, Ethan glanced at me, then at the baby in my arms. "Is she my sister?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Her name's Lily." He looked at her for a long time, then reached out and brushed her tiny hand with his finger. She grabbed on tight, and something in Ethan's face shifted. "She's cute," he said, almost smiling. We stayed at the park for hours, talking about nothing and everything. When the sun started to set, Ethan stood, hands shoved in his pockets. "Maybe we could do this again," he said, not quite meeting Mark's eyes. Mark nodded, his voice thick. "Anytime, whenever you want." On the way home, Mark cried openly, relief and sorrow mixing together. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me." But I hadn't done anything special. I'd just held us together as best I could, even when it felt like we were splintering apart. Over the next few weeks, Ethan visited us a few times. Each visit was a little easier than the last. He was shy, awkward, but kind. He brought Lily a stuffed bear, sat with Mark in the backyard, sometimes even smiled. But not everyone in my life understood. My mother worried, her voice tight and anxious whenever Ethan's name came up. "He's a stranger, Emily. You don't know what he's been through. What if he wants something from you?" I tried to explain that he was a child too, a boy trying to find his place, to make sense of a world that had failed him more than once. but I could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear. I understood it, even if I hated it. Fear was contagious. It seeped into the walls, the corners of our home, making it hard to breathe sometimes. And then, just as I started to believe that we might actually make it, that we might heal, another letter arrived. This one wasn't from Ethan or Laura. The handwriting was neat, official. Inside was a court summons. Laura was being charged with kidnapping, and I was being called to testify. Suddenly, it all came rushing back. The panic, the fear, the helplessness. I held the letter in my trembling hands, the weight of it crushing me. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and cried. Mark sat beside me, silent, his presence a comfort and a reminder of everything we'd survived. We had made it this far, but there was still so much left to face. Women Unwritten. The nurse took my baby for tests. But I saw her in the parking lot, I followed, and the truth shattered my family. Part 4. Docs. The weeks before the trial felt like waiting to be struck by lightning, every day charged with a quiet, unpredictable dread. The prosecutor's office called, scheduling meetings, asking me to recount everything again and again. I told my story until the words felt like someone else's, until I heard my own voice from a distance, numb and practiced. Mark withdrew deeper into himself, guilt radiating off him in silent waves. My mother hovered, torn between outrage and fear for what this would do to our already battered family. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, I'd stand in the nursery doorway, watching Lily sleep. Her tiny chest rose and fell so steadily, untouched by the chaos swirling around her. I envied her innocence, her trust that the world was safe and predictable. I wanted to be that mother for her, strong, calm, unbreakable. But I felt like glass, clear but fragile, shattering with the smallest pressure. Ethan came by less often. I could see in his eyes the worry for his mom, the confusion about what was right. We never talked about the trial directly, but it hovered in every conversation, every awkward hug goodbye. He'd sit in our kitchen, his hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa, silent except for the soft, nervous questions that slipped out when he thought I wasn't listening. Will she go to jail? Will she hate me if I keep seeing you? I never had good answers. I just listened, wishing I could promise him something better. The night before I was to testify, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house, listening to the heater click and sigh, the refrigerator hum. I ended up in the garage, where Mark was sitting in the dark, elbows on his knees. He didn't look up when I came in, but I could see the tears drying on his face. I keep thinking this is all my fault, he said, voice hoarse. I sat beside him, feeling the cold concrete through my slippers. You made mistakes. We both have. But Laura chose what she did. He shook his head. If I'd just answered her calls, if I'd tried to help Ethan, maybe none of this would have happened. There was nothing I could say to that. Maybe he was right. Maybe we all bore some weight in this. I reached for his hand, squeezed it until my knuckles ached. The courthouse was a cold, echoing place, its marble floors and high ceilings designed to intimidate. I sat in a stiff wooden pew, hands folded in my lap, eyes on the ground. Laura entered, flanked by her attorney, looking smaller than I remembered, her hair limp, eyes shadowed. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her presence like a pulse. When they called my name, my legs felt wooden. I took the stand, voice trembling but steady. I told the truth. How Laura had taken my daughter, how she'd returned her, the fear that gripped me in those hours of not knowing. I tried to keep my voice calm, but my hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the witness box. The defense attorney was gentle, almost apologetic. He asked about Laura's state of mind, about her past, about whether I believed she truly meant to harm my baby. I thought of that night in Laura's living room, the desperation in her eyes, her shaking hands. I hesitated, then answered honestly. No, I don't believe she wanted to hurt my daughter. I think she was lost, and she made a terrible mistake. Laura's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look up. I was dismissed, and I walked back to my seat, knees shaking, heart pounding. The trial was short, just a few days. The jury deliberated overnight. I barely slept, pacing the house, waiting for the phone to ring. When the verdict came, I drove to the courthouse alone, needing to face it on my own terms. Laura was found guilty, but the judge was lenient. She would serve time, but it would be in a facility with counseling, with the possibility of early release for good behavior. She wouldn't be lost forever. When the judge read the sentence, Laura looked up at me for the first time. There was gratitude there, and grief, and something like peace. Afterwards, I saw Ethan standing alone outside the courthouse, shoulders hunched. He looked so young, so vulnerable. My heart ached for him. I walked over, unsure what to say. He spoke first. She says she's sorry, for everything. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I know, and I'm sorry for everything too. He stared at the ground, scuffing his shoe. Can I still come over? To see Lily? And Mark? It was such a small thing, such a simple human hope, but it undid me. I pulled him into a hug, feeling him stiffen, and then, slowly, relax. You can come over anytime you want, I whispered. Mark was waiting for us at home. When Ethan walked in, Mark hugged him like he'd been holding his breath for years. For a while, we just sat together in the living room, the three of us and Lily sleeping in her swing, letting the quiet fill up the spaces where pain had lived. Life didn't magically return to normal. My mother still worried, her questions about Ethan sharper now, tinged with a fear she couldn't hide. What if he resents you? What if Laura blames you for her sentence? I didn't have answers. I only knew I couldn't turn Ethan away. He was as much a victim as any of us, a boy trying to make sense of a world that had turned upside down. The news cycle moved on, but the ripples in our lives lingered. I went back to work part-time, leaving Lily with my mother, who watched her with a kind of possessive vigilance that made me uneasy. Mark struggled with guilt and shame, but he kept seeing his therapist, and little by little, I saw glimpses of the man I'd married return. One afternoon, while sorting through the mail, I found another letter, this one from Laura, written from the facility. She wrote to thank me for my honesty in court, to apologize again for the pain she'd caused. She told me about the counseling, how she was finally facing her own demons, how much she missed Ethan, how grateful she was that he had us. There was a line near the end that stayed with me. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is to forgive yourself. I wrote back, unsure of what to say, but wanting her to know she wasn't alone. I told her about Lily's first laugh, about how Ethan had started teaching Mark to play video games, about how we were all trying to heal, one day at a time. Autumn came, and with it, the slow rebuilding of trust. Ethan started calling me M instead of Mrs. H. My mother relaxed, just a little, watching him play with Lily and seeing that he was just a boy, not a threat. Mark smiled more often, held me a little longer at night, whispered thank you when he thought I was asleep. But there were still days when the shadows crept in, when I jumped at the sound of the doorbell, when Mark froze at the sight of a hospital on TV, when Ethan retreated into himself after a phone call from his mother. Healing wasn't linear. It was messy and slow and full of setbacks. One evening, after Ethan had gone home and Lily was asleep, Mark and I sat together on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. He took my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on my skin. Do you think we'll ever be normal again? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. I thought about it, about everything we'd lost and everything we'd found, about the cracks in our lives, how they'd let in the light. I squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of it, the reality of it. I don't know if we'll ever be normal, I said. but I think we might be something better." He smiled, a real smile, and for the first time in months, I felt hope blooming in my chest. Fragile, but real. The past was never going to let us go entirely. But we were learning how to live with it, to build something new out of the wreckage. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Women Unwritten. The nurse took my baby for tests, but I saw her in the parking lot, I followed, and the truth shattered my family. Part 5. Docs. It's strange how time starts to heal wounds, even when you think it can't. There were days when the heaviness of what happened pressed down so hard I could barely breathe, but there were also days when I caught myself humming while folding laundry, or laughing at something Lily did, and I realized I wasn't always thinking about Laura or the trial or what could have been. Life was moving forward, quietly, almost stubbornly. Ethan slipped into our lives in the gentlest way. He started coming by after school a few times a week. Sometimes he'd help Mark with chores in the garage. Other times he'd just sit in the living room, texting or playing with Lily. He was awkward with her at first, nervous when she'd cry, but he learned quickly how to make her giggle, how to distract her with funny faces or silly voices. Watching them together, I felt something loosen inside me, a thread of hope winding its way through the mess of our history. Mark tried too. He set aside his guilt, at least outwardly, and made an effort to really talk to Ethan. They went to a baseball game together, just the two of them, and when they got home, Mark looked lighter, like the weight he'd been carrying had shifted a little. I found him in Lily's room that night, just standing over her crib, tears on his cheeks. "He called me Dad," he whispered, voice ragged. "He said he wanted to try." I hugged him, feeling his body shake with relief. For all the pain, for all the ways we'd failed each other, maybe there was still room for new beginnings. Laura's letters came every couple of weeks. She wrote about counseling, about the other women in the facility, about how much she missed Ethan. Sometimes she included drawings she'd done, birds, trees, little sketches of what she imagined Lily looked like now. I always wrote back, sometimes just a few lines, sometimes longer. There was something comforting in the ritual, a thread of connection that reminded me forgiveness wasn't just for her. It was for me too. I didn't tell many people about our correspondence. My mother wouldn't have understood, and even Mark seemed uneasy about it. But I needed to believe that people could change, that we weren't doomed to repeat our worst moments forever. Still, the past lingered. Sometimes when the phone rang late at night, my heart would race, fearing bad news. Mark had nightmares. He'd wake up gasping, sweating, reaching for me in the dark. Sometimes I'd find Ethan staring off into space, lost in worries I couldn't reach. One afternoon in early winter, I was making soup in the kitchen when Ethan came in, his face pinched and pale. He handed me his phone. On the screen was a message from a classmate. "Your mom's the psycho who stole a baby. Bet you're just as messed up." My stomach twisted. Ethan's hands shook as he put the phone down. "Everyone knows," he said quietly. "Somebody's parents must have talked about the trial. Now they're all saying stuff online. They keep asking me if I'm going to snap too." I wanted to scream, to find whoever had started it and shake them until they understood the harm they'd done. But all I could do was sit down beside Ethan and pull him into a hug. He resisted at first, but then melted against me, sobbing quietly. "I'm not her," he choked out. "I just wanted a family." I stroked his hair, my own tears stinging my eyes. "You're not her. You're you, and you belong here. Nothing anybody says can change that." That night, Mark and I sat in bed, talking in low voices while Lily slept between us. He was angrier than I'd ever seen him. "Kids are cruel," he muttered. "But it's not their fault. It's their parents. People don't realize how much their words echo." We agreed to speak with Ethan's school, to ask for help. The counselor was kind and understanding, but there was only so much she could do. The rumors faded eventually, replaced by new gossip, but the damage lingered. Ethan became quieter, more careful. He stopped bringing friends home, stopped mentioning names. But he kept coming to see us. He kept playing with Lily, kept trying with Mark. Some days were good, easy, light, like any other family. Other days were harder, the past pressing in, but we learned to weather them. One snowy weekend, Ethan brought a photo album he'd made at the facility's art therapy class. It was filled with snapshots of his life, pictures of him as a baby, photos with Laura, school awards, and at the end, a few recent shots of him with Mark and Lily. He handed it to me shyly. "I wanted you to have this, so you know I'm not just a story. I'm real." I hugged him, overcome. Later, I showed the album to Mark. He stared at the photos for a long time, then whispered, "He looks so much like me." Healing was slow, but it was happening. Laura's release date was set for the spring, with conditions. She'd have to attend regular counseling, stay away from certain places, but she'd be free to see Ethan again. He was anxious about it, excited, scared, hopeful. We tried to help him prepare, talking about boundaries, about forgiveness, about how it was okay to feel everything he was feeling. The week before Laura's release, she sent a final letter from the facility. She thanked me for believing in her, for letting Ethan be part of our lives, for writing back when she felt most alone. There was a postscript. "I hope one day I can thank you in person, but I'll wait until you're ready." I cried when I read it, not just for her, but for all of us, for the mess we'd made, for the grace we'd found in the middle of it. Spring came slowly that year, buds pushing through the hard earth, green returning to the trees. On the day Laura was released, Ethan asked if he could spend the afternoon alone with her. Mark and I waited at home, nerves raw, trying not to pace. He came back in the early evening, face flushed, eyes bright. "It was good," he said, a little breathless. "She's different. Happier, I think. She said she wants to get better. She wants me to keep seeing you too." Mark hugged him, tears slipping down his face. I squeezed Ethan's hand, pride and relief swelling inside me. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat on the porch, listening to the spring peepers, the world soft and new. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The past was still there, but it didn't own me. We'd survived. We'd even found a way to grow. We weren't the family I'd imagined. But maybe, in some ways, we were something stronger. A family built not just on blood, but on forgiveness, on courage, on the willingness to begin again. Women Unwritten. The nurse took my baby for tests. But I saw her in the parking lot. I followed, and the truth shattered my family. Part 6. Docs. For a while after Laura's release, everything felt tentative, like we were all learning to walk again on unfamiliar ground. Ethan split his time between our house and Laura's small apartment on the other side of town. He'd come back some weekends quieter, thoughtful, sorting through the newness of having two families and the old wounds that still stung. Sometimes he'd call late at night, his voice small and uncertain, asking if it was okay to come over, even if it was just to sleep on our couch and listen to Mark snore from the next room. Laura kept her promise to take things slow. She called before every visit, checked in with me about Ethan's moods, and even sent over a thank you note when I dropped off groceries for them one afternoon. There was an awkwardness between us, a hesitancy that never quite faded, but underneath it was a current of mutual respect. We didn't talk about what had happened, not directly. The past hung between us, but we both seemed to understand that picking at the scars would only make them bleed again. Mark struggled more than he admitted. On the surface, he was patient and supportive, always willing to drive Ethan across town, always gentle with Lily. But I caught him some nights in the kitchen, staring into his coffee, wrestling with some invisible weight. Once, I heard him leave a message on Laura's voicemail, his voice cracking as he apologized, again, for everything. I think he hoped if he said it enough times, the guilt would finally dissolve. As for me, I poured myself into the small rituals of daily life. I baked bread. I planted flowers with Lily. I organized family dinners that felt, for the first time, like a celebration instead of an obligation. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, I reread Laura's old letters, tracing the shaky lines of her handwriting and wondering if I'd ever have the courage to let go of all the fear. My mother noticed the change in me too. She still eyed Ethan with a kind of wary protectiveness, but she stopped making snide remarks about that woman and started asking Ethan about school, about his favorite foods, about his dreams. One afternoon in May, Laura called and asked if we could meet. "Just us," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something I need to say." We met at a small coffee shop near the hospital. She looked fragile, almost translucent in the harsh sunlight, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. "I wanted to thank you," she began, her eyes fixed on the swirling cream in her coffee. "You didn't have to let Ethan into your life. You didn't have to answer my letters. I know what I did was unforgivable." I shook my head. "It wasn't unforgivable. It was desperate, and it was wrong. But you gave her back. You tried to make it right." She looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "I was so angry. At Mark, at the world, at myself. I thought taking your daughter would make someone pay attention. But all it did was hurt another mother. I see that now." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "We're all just trying to survive the best way we know how. I think you're brave for facing it." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that feels heavy but honest. When we stood to leave, she hugged me, awkward and stiff at first, then tight, as if she was afraid to let go. On the drive home, I realized I didn't hate her. I pitied her, yes, and I was still angry on some level for all the pain she'd caused. But more than anything, I felt a strange kinship with her. We were mothers who had both lost too much and clawed our way back from the edge. Summer came, and with it, new rhythms. Lily took her first steps across our living room, her laughter echoing off the walls. Ethan started his first job at a bookstore, coming home with stories of quirky customers and the smell of paper and ink clinging to his clothes. Mark and I took turns making dinner, competing to see who could make Ethan smile first after a hard shift. One hot evening, Ethan asked if he could bring Laura over for dinner. I hesitated, feeling my heart skip. Mark squeezed my hand beneath the table, his way of saying, "Let's try." That night, Laura arrived with a homemade pie and a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself. The conversation was awkward at first, but Lily's antics broke the ice, and soon we were laughing, sharing stories, passing plates around the table. After dinner, Laura lingered in the kitchen, helping me wash dishes. She looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You saved me, you know. I never would have believed it, but you did." I shook my head, smiling softly. "I think you saved yourself." We stood in silence, the warm water running over our hands, and for the first time, I felt the past loosening its grip. The summer was full of small, precious moments. Picnics at the park, movie nights in the backyard, Ethan and Mark building a treehouse for Lily, Laura cheering them on from below. Even my mother began to soften, offering Laura a glass of lemonade one afternoon and joining in the laughter when Lily smeared ice cream all over her face. But not everything was easy. Sometimes, I'd see Laura watching Mark and Ethan together, a sadness passing over her face so quickly, I almost missed it. Sometimes, I'd catch Mark staring at old baby photos of Lily, guilt etched deep in his eyes. And sometimes, I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, certain I'd heard someone crying, only to find the house still and quiet. One night in late August, Ethan came to me as I was tucking Lily into bed. He hesitated in the doorway, then blurted out, "Do you think I'm broken? Because of everything?" I knelt beside him, taking his hand. "No, Ethan. I think you're brave. I think you're strong. You've survived things most people can't imagine, and you're still here, still trying. That's not broken. That's resilient." He nodded, biting his lip. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong anywhere. Like I'm not really part of either family. I hugged him, fierce and sure. You belong here, with us, with your mom, with everyone who loves you. Family isn't just blood, Ethan. It's who stays. It's who forgives. It's who shows up, even when it's hard. He nodded, and for the first time, I saw real hope in his eyes. As summer faded into fall, I realized something had shifted. The fear that had once stalked every corner of our lives had faded, replaced by something quieter, steadier. Not certainty, because nothing in life is certain, but faith. Faith that we could survive, that we could forgive, that we could love again, even after everything we'd lost. The past would always be part of us, woven into every moment, but it no longer defined us. We were writing a new story, one page at a time, and for the first time, I was excited to see what came next. Women Unwritten. The nurse took my baby for tests, but I saw her in the parking lot. I followed, and the truth shattered my family. Part 7. Docs. That fall, something gentle settled over our lives. I could feel it in the way Mark whistled in the mornings, and the way Ethan let himself nap on the couch, shoes kicked off, one hand curled around Lily's abandoned teddy bear. The air was full of wood smoke and cinnamon, and even the trees outside seemed to lean in, as if listening for laughter. For the first time in a long time, I found myself looking forward. I started making plans again, signing Lily up for music classes, buying a new calendar for the kitchen, jotting down weekend trips we might take as a family. Mark began talking about fixing up the guest room, maybe painting it a bright yellow, just in case we ever needed space for someone else. There was a sense of possibility, fragile but real. Ethan's confidence grew, little by little. He started bringing friends from work over for dinner, kids I'd never met before, their laughter filling the house. When one of them asked if Ethan's two moms got along, he blushed, but he didn't flinch. I caught his smile as he told them, "Yeah, it was complicated, but we're good now." My heart swelled with pride, and I realized that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply live your truth out loud. Laura came by more often, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes to drop off a book she thought Ethan would like. Once, she arrived with an envelope of old photos, snapshots of Ethan as a baby, of herself as a much younger woman, smiling uncertainly at the camera. She left them with me saying, "You'll know when he's ready." I tucked them in the back of my closet, a quiet promise to the future. My mother softened in ways I never expected. She began inviting Laura to Sunday dinners, and one evening, I found the two of them talking in low voices over pie, sharing stories about motherhood and loss. I listened from the hallway, unsure if I was intruding, but the sight of them together, two women who had every reason to distrust each other, made me believe in forgiveness all over again. Of course, there were still shadows. Mark struggled with guilt, especially around the anniversary of Laura's arrest. He'd become withdrawn, his smiles brittle, his temper on edge. One night, as rain battered the windows, he confessed, "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I did to Laura and Ethan." I held him, feeling the tremor in his shoulders, and reminded him that forgiveness isn't a destination, but a practice. Something we choose, again and again, every day. Ethan, too, had setbacks. Sometimes he'd come home from school with that old, haunted look, especially when someone muttered about his family under their breath. I tried to give him space, but I always left his favorite snacks on the counter, little notes reminding him he was loved. On the worst days, he'd find his way to Lily's room, letting her climb onto his lap, her tiny hands patting his cheeks until he smiled again. Lily was our anchor, our reminder that new beginnings were possible. Her laughter was infectious, her curiosity boundless. She was the first to reach for Laura's hand, the first to demand a hug from Ethan, the first to climb into my lap and say, "Happy family," in her bright, matter-of-fact way. Sometimes I'd watch her sleep, her hair fanned out on the pillow, and think, if she can trust us, maybe we can trust ourselves. As the holidays approached, Laura suggested we do something together. Just the five of us. No expectations, no guests. We decided on a simple celebration: homemade pizza, board games, and a bonfire in the backyard. Ethan took charge of the fire, stacking logs with methodical care while Mark hovered, offering advice that was mostly ignored. Laura and I made pizza dough from scratch, laughing when flour dusted our faces, and Lily insisted on taste testing every topping. That night, gathered around the fire, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. We told stories, funny, embarrassing, true, and roasted marshmallows until the stars came out. Laura sat beside Ethan, her arm around his shoulders, and Mark leaned into me, his head on my shoulder. Lily fell asleep in my lap, sticky with marshmallow and soot, her breath warm against my neck. After everyone else had gone inside, Laura lingered by the embers. She turned to me, her face lit orange by the flames. "I know I can never give you back what I took," she said quietly, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the kind of person you can trust." I squeezed her hand, words unnecessary. In that moment, we understood each other. Two mothers who had lost and found, who had built something fragile and real out of the ashes. Winter arrived, and with it came new routines. Ethan got his driver's license, Mark started a woodworking class, and Lily discovered the joy of stomping through puddles in her yellow boots. I found myself less afraid of the future, less haunted by what might go wrong. There were still moments of pain, like when Laura missed a counseling appointment and panicked, or when Ethan's birth father was listed as unknown on a school form, and we had to explain, again, the complicated truth. But we faced them together, as a family. One evening, as snow began to fall, Ethan knocked on our bedroom door. He stood there, awkward and earnest, clutching the envelope of old photos Laura had given me months before. "I think I'm ready," he said, his voice trembling. "Will you look at them with me?" We sat at the kitchen table, Mark joining us, and slowly, carefully, we sifted through Ethan's history. There were pictures of Laura holding him as a baby, of birthdays and Christmas mornings, of the two of them laughing in faded sunlight. Near the bottom was a picture of Mark and Laura, barely adults, eyes full of hope and fear. Ethan stared at it for a long time. "Do you regret it?" he asked Mark softly. Mark's voice was rough. "I regret hurting your mother. I regret missing so much of your life. But I don't regret you. Never you." Ethan nodded, wiping his eyes. "I'm glad you're here now." After he went to bed, Mark and I sat quietly, the weight of the years between us. "We've all lost things we can never get back," he murmured. "But maybe that's what makes what we have now matter more." I thought about that as I climbed the stairs, Lily's soft snores echoing from her room, the house warm and safe around me. We had been broken, yes, but we had not been destroyed. And in our mending, we had found something we never would have discovered if our lives had been easy or untouched. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to keep loving, even when loving felt hard. It was about choosing each other, day after day, season after season, no matter how the world outside might try to remind us of all we'd lost. And that, I thought, as I drifted to sleep beside Mark, was what made us a family. Not the blood, or the paperwork, or the stories other people told about us, but the small, stubborn acts of grace we offered each other, again and again, until love was stronger than fear. Women Unwritten. The nurse took my baby for tests, but I saw her in the parking lot. I followed, and the truth shattered my family. Part 8. Docs. By the time the last snow melted and the world began to thaw, the old ache inside me felt softer, like a bruise that finally stopped throbbing. I watched Lily pressing her hands to the window, eyes wide as birds returned to the feeder, her tiny voice chirping, "Look, Mama, they came back!" And I thought, so did we. Our family had been remade by sorrow, but it was held together now by threads of patience and choice. There was no perfect ending, no erasing what Laura had done, what Mark had failed to do, or what I had feared and forgiven. But there was a rhythm to our days, a gentle certainty that even if the past knocked at our door, we could meet it together. One bright Saturday, we all gathered in the backyard, a picnic blanket spread under the budding magnolia tree. Laura brought lemon bars she'd baked that morning, and Mark helped Ethan assemble a battered old bike for Lily, who shrieked with delight at the thought of riding like her big brother. My mother was there too, quietly watching over all of us, her face finally free of suspicion, her hands busy braiding Lily's hair. At one point, Laura sat beside me, her eyes on Ethan and Mark as they adjusted the bike's training wheels. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "I still wake up afraid you'll all disappear, that I'll lose this second chance." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman from that day at the hospital, but someone older, humbler, and infinitely more human. "We're here," I said. "We're not going anywhere. You've earned your place." She squeezed my hand, and for the first time, the contact felt easy, natural. Forgiveness was no longer something I gave her. It was something we shared. Lily wobbled across the grass on her new bike, Mark and Ethan jogging alongside, their laughter blending together. My mother clapped from the blanket, cheering Lily on, and Laura snapped a photo, her eyes shining. There were still rough days, moments when Mark's guilt resurfaced, when Ethan retreated into silence after a hard call with his mother, or when Lily woke from nightmares she couldn't name. But these storms passed more quickly now, softened by love and the knowledge that none of us had to weather them alone. As spring deepened, Ethan's high school graduation approached. The invitations came back with polite regrets or cautious congratulations. But our house was full that day. Laura and my mother and Mark and me, all of us crowding the bleachers, waving as Ethan crossed the stage. I cried, unable to stop myself, and when it was over, he ran to us, pulling us into a tangled hug. Later, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Ethan found me in the kitchen. He handed me a thank you note, his handwriting careful. "For giving me a home," he said, his voice thick. I pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, and told him the truth. "You made us a family. We're better for having found you." That summer, Laura got a new job at the hospital, not as a nurse, but as a patient advocate, helping families navigate fear and confusion. She told me once, "I want to make sure no one ever feels as alone as I did." I admired her, even when I knew she still fought her own battles every day. Mark, too, found purpose in small acts. He volunteered at a support group for fathers, sharing his regrets and his hope. Sometimes, I'd find him in the nursery after Lily fell asleep, just watching her, whispering promises I didn't need to hear to believe. And me? I learned to breathe again. I learned that strength wasn't about never breaking, but about letting myself be held. By Mark, by my mother, by Laura, even by Ethan. I let myself be happy. Some days, the joy startled me, as if I'd forgotten how lightness felt. On the anniversary of Lily's birth, we gathered for a quiet dinner. Laura arrived with a single pink rose. Mark made Lily's favorite pasta. Ethan set the table, and my mother brought out a chocolate cake, singing off-key. After dinner, Lily climbed into my lap, sticky fingers pressed to my cheek. "Mama," she said, "can we be like this forever?" I looked around at our mismatched, mended family, at all the scars and laughter and second chances, and I felt something rise in my chest, a fierce, unshakable gratitude. "We'll always find our way back to each other," I promised. "No matter what." That night, after the house quieted and the dishes were done, I sat on the porch as the last light faded. The air was cool, sweet with the scent of magnolia. I remembered who I had been before all this, so certain, so untested. I thought of the nurse in blue, of the desperate mother, of the girl who had run barefoot through a parking lot, terrified and wild with love. I was all of those women, and I was more. I had survived fear and betrayal and loss, and found a way to forgive. I had learned that family is not about perfection, but about presence, about showing up again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. We are all unwritten, I thought. Every day a blank page, every choice a new line in the story. And as I stood up to go inside, I knew we were writing something beautiful, one imperfect day at a time. Thanks for listening. Subscribe if this story finds you, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from?